My mother told my wife I was cheating. I wasn't. She packed her bags and left without asking me a single question. A week later, I proved it was all a lie. She begged to come home. I just said you believed her over me. The door stayed closed. My name's Levi. I'm 34 years old, and I used to think I had a pretty solid life. Good job as an operations manager at a logistics company, a house in the suburbs of Charlotte with a yard big enough to justify buying a riding mower I absolutely did not need, and a wife named Josie who I'd been married to for 6 years. We met at a friend's cookout back when I was 26, and I remember thinking she was the kind of woman who could make you forget your own name just by laughing at one of your bad jokes. She had this warmth about her, this openness, and from day one I thought I'd found the person I was going to grow old with. And for a while, that's exactly what was happening. We had our rough patches like anyone. She wanted kids sooner than I did. I worked too many late nights during our first 2 years. We bickered about dishes and who forgot to switch the laundry and whether or not it was acceptable to eat cereal for dinner 3 nights in a row. Normal stuff. Married stuff. But we always figured it out because at the core of everything, I thought we trusted each other. Turns out, trust had an expiration date I didn't know about. Let me back up and tell you about my mother, because she's the key to this whole disaster. Her name is Colleen, and she's the kind of woman who could start a wildfire with a whisper. I'm not saying she's evil. I'm saying she's a woman who has spent her entire life believing that the world revolves around her, and anyone who doesn't fall in line is a threat. Growing up, it was manageable. My dad, rest his soul, was a quiet guy who spent most of his time in the garage building furniture and pretending he didn't hear whatever drama my mom was spinning up in the kitchen. He passed away when I was 22, heart attack at 59, and after that my mom latched onto me like I was the last lifeboat on the Titanic. I have an older sister, Sutton, who moved to Portland when she was 19 and basically drew a circle around her life that our mother was not invited into. Can't blame her. Sutton figured out early that distance was the only defense against Colleen, and she executed her exit strategy with military precision. That left me, the dutiful son, the one who answered every phone call and showed up to every holiday dinner and sat through every guilt trip about how lonely she was and how her kids didn't appreciate everything she sacrificed. When I married Josie, my mom smiled through the wedding like someone was holding a lemon under her nose. She never liked Josie. Not because Josie did anything wrong, but because Josie existed. Josie took her son's attention. Josie had opinions. Josie didn't worship at the altar of Colleen, and that was an unforgivable sin. For the first few years, it was subtle. My mom would make little comments about Josie's cooking. She'd forget to include Josie in group texts about family plans and then act shocked when we showed up late or not at all. She'd tell me, in this sweet, concerned voice, that Josie seemed distant or cold, and ask if everything was okay in the marriage. I always brushed it off. That's just mom being mom, I told myself. She doesn't mean anything by it. I was wrong. She meant every single word. Things started shifting about 8 months before the incident. My company went through a restructuring, and I got tapped to lead a new regional project that meant longer hours, some travel, and a lot of late nights at the office with my team. My direct supervisor was a woman named Piper, mid-40s, married with 3 kids, and about as interested in me romantically as I am in competitive birdwatching. She was my boss. We worked together. That's it. But my mom, who had a sixth sense for manufacturing drama, picked up on the fact that I was spending more time at work and ran with it like she was training for the Olympics. She started calling me more often, asking where I was, what I was doing, who I was with. And when I mentioned Piper's name casually one night over dinner at my mom's house, I saw something flash behind her eyes. Not concern, calculation. Looking back, I should have seen it coming. But I was buried in spreadsheets and shipping routes and trying not to let my team down during the biggest project of my career. I wasn't paying attention to the chess game my mother was playing behind my back. The first domino fell on a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays were the days Josie did her long runs. She was training for a half marathon, and she'd be gone for about 90 minutes in the evening, which meant she usually got home around 7:30, showered, and we'd eat dinner together. I loved those nights. She'd come in all flushed and proud of herself, and I'd have something ready on the stove, and we'd sit at the kitchen table and just talk. That particular Tuesday, I got home from work around 6:15. Josie was already out running. I changed clothes, started making pasta, and my phone buzzed with a text from my mom. It said, I think you should know that people are starting to talk about you and that woman from your office. I'm just looking out for you, sweetheart. I stared at that text for a solid 30 seconds. Then I typed back, nobody is talking about anything because there's nothing to talk about. She replied with a sad face emoji and, I just don't want to see you get hurt. I put my phone down and went back to boiling water, annoyed but not alarmed. Classic Colleen. Stirring a pot that didn't need stirring. What I didn't know was that she wasn't just texting me. She was texting Josie too. And what she told Josie was a whole lot worse than vague gossip. She told Josie that she had proof I was having an affair with Piper. She told Josie that someone had seen us together at a hotel. She told Josie that she was sorry, that she'd been holding this in for weeks because she didn't want to hurt anyone, but that Josie deserved to know the truth. None of it was true. Not a single word. But I wouldn't find any of that out until it was too late, because Josie never asked me about it. She never brought it up. She never gave me a chance to explain or deny, or even look confused. She just believed it. And 3 days later, while I was at work on a Friday afternoon, she packed 2 suitcases, left her wedding ring on the kitchen counter, and drove to her parents' house in Raleigh without so much as a text message telling me she was leaving. I came home to an empty house, a ring on the counter, and half the closet cleaned out. No note, no voicemail, nothing. Just silence and the faint smell of her shampoo still hanging in the bathroom air. I stood in our bedroom doorway for I don't know how long, trying to make my brain process what I was seeing. My first thought was that something had happened to her. An emergency. An accident. I called her phone 6 times. Straight to voicemail. I called her best friend Marlo. No answer. I called her sister Annette. No answer. I was about 10 seconds from calling the police when my phone finally rang, and it was Josie's mother, Donna. She's here, Donna said, her voice colder than anything I'd ever heard from her. She knows everything, Levi. Don't call here again. And then she hung up. I stood there in my kitchen holding the phone, staring at Josie's wedding ring sitting on the granite like a tiny silver accusation, and I genuinely could not figure out what had just happened. She knows everything. What everything? What was there to know? I hadn't done anything. I racked my brain trying to think of some secret, some mistake, some drunken confession I'd forgotten about, and came up completely empty because there was nothing to find. I tried calling Josie again. Voicemail. I sent her a text that said, I don't know what's going on, but please talk to me. No response. I sent another one. Josie, I'm scared. Please just tell me what happened. Nothing. I sent a third one around midnight that just said, I love you. Whatever this is, we can fix it. Read receipt came through at 12:14 in the morning. No reply. That first night alone in our house was one of the worst experiences of my life. I didn't sleep. I sat on the couch in the dark like some kind of haunted house prop, cycling through confusion, fear, anger, and back to confusion. I called my buddy Declan around 1 in the morning because he was the only person I knew who kept weird hours, and I told him everything I knew, which was basically nothing. Did you cheat on her? Declan asked, and I appreciated the directness. No, I've never cheated on anyone in my life. Then something happened that made her think you did. You need to find out what. The next morning, Saturday, I drove to Raleigh. 2 hours on I-85 with my stomach in knots and my mind running scenarios that made no sense. When I pulled up to Josie's parents' house, her father, Glenn, was standing on the front porch like he'd been waiting for me. Glenn had always liked me. We watched football together. He helped me install the deck on our house. He once told me over beers that he was glad his daughter found a good one. But the man standing on that porch didn't look like he thought I was a good one anymore. Glenn, I don't know what's happening, I said, and I could hear the desperation in my own voice. I haven't done anything. I swear to you. He looked at me for a long time. Then he said, Your mother called Josie 3 days ago. She said you've been sleeping with your boss for months. She said she has photos. She said a friend of hers saw you two at a hotel in Greensboro. The ground shifted under my feet. Not literally, but it felt like it. My mother. Of course it was my mother. Glenn, that is a lie. Every word of it is a lie. I have never touched Piper. I have never been to a hotel with anyone. My mother is making this up because she has never accepted that I married Josie, and she has been trying to sabotage this marriage from day one. Glenn's expression didn't change. She said she has photos, Levi. There are no photos because nothing happened. You can't photograph something that doesn't exist. He shook his head slowly. Josie doesn't want to see you right now. She's a mess. She's been crying for 3 days straight. Whatever the truth is, You need to give her space. I wanted to scream. I wanted to kick down the front door and grab Josie by the shoulders and make her look me in the eyes and tell me she really believed I would do that to her. But I didn't, because I could see in Glenn's face that he was conflicted, and pushing past him would only make things worse. So I drove 2 hours back home with tears streaming down my face and a rage building in my chest that I didn't know what to do with. When I got home, I called my mother. She answered on the second ring, cheerful as a morning talk show host. "Hey, sweetheart. How's your Saturday? What did you tell Josie?" Silence. Then, in that voice she uses when she's pretending to be innocent, "What do you mean?" "Mom, what did you tell my wife?" "I told her the truth, Levi. I told her what I've been hearing. People talk, and I thought she deserved to know before she got blindsided." "What people? Who told you anything?" "Because I haven't done a single thing wrong, and you know it. I saw how that woman looked at you at the company picnic, and you've been coming home late every night." A mother knows, Levi. I had to pull the phone away from my ear because my hand was shaking. She saw how Piper looked at me at the company picnic. Piper, who spent the entire picnic talking to her husband and corralling her 8-year-old away from the dessert table. My mother had fabricated an entire affair based on nothing, and she'd sold it to my wife with enough conviction that Josie packed her bags and left without asking me a single question. "You need to call Josie right now and tell her you made it up," I said. "I didn't make anything up. I told her what I believe." "What you believe is a fantasy, Mom. You've been trying to break us up since the day we got engaged, and this time you might have actually done it. Are you happy?" She started crying. Of course she did. That was her move. Whenever she got cornered, she cried, and then the conversation became about comforting her instead of holding her accountable. I'd fallen for it 1,000 times. "Not this time. I'm not doing this," I said. "You call Josie and you tell her the truth, or I swear I will never speak to you again." She hung up on me, and she didn't call Josie. I know because I checked with Glenn the next day, and he confirmed that the only person who'd called was me. The week that followed was the longest of my life. I went to work on Monday because I didn't know what else to do. Piper asked me if I was okay because I apparently looked like I hadn't slept in a year, which was close to accurate. I told her the short version, and she was horrified. She offered to talk to Josie herself, to explain that nothing had ever happened, but I told her I couldn't even get Josie on the phone. I sent Josie a message every single day, Monday through Friday. Each one was calm, honest, and clear. I told her I loved her. I told her I had never been unfaithful. I told her my mother was lying and that I could prove it if she would just give me the chance. Every single message was read. Not one was answered. By Thursday, the anger I felt toward my mother had hardened into something cold and permanent. I didn't call her. She called me twice, and I let it go to voicemail. The first message was her crying and saying she was sorry if she caused any confusion. The second was her saying I was overreacting and that she was just trying to protect me. Protect me. That's what she called blowing up my marriage with a fabricated affair. Protection. On Friday, exactly 1 week after Josie left, I did something I should have done on day one. I sat down at my computer and started building a case. Not a legal case, although that would come later. A case for the truth. I pulled up my work calendar and exported every single entry from the past 8 months. Every meeting, every late night, every work trip. Then I cross-referenced it with my credit card statements, my GPS data from my phone, my toll records from the highway transponder, and my building access logs from the office security system. If my mother said someone saw me at a hotel in Greensboro, I was going to prove exactly where I was on every single night she could possibly be referring to. And what I found, laid out in black and white, was the most boring, faithful, unremarkable schedule a married man could have. Office, home, grocery store, office, home, gas station, office, home. There was not a single gap, not a single unexplained absence, not a single night where I couldn't account for my exact location with digital receipts and timestamps. I compiled everything into a folder, printed copies, saved backups, and then I called Declan and told him I needed a favor. "Name it," he said. "I need you to help me get this in front of Josie, because she won't talk to me, but she might listen to evidence." Before I get to the evidence, I need to tell you about the week between Josie leaving and me putting that folder together, because it wasn't just some montage of a guy typing at a computer and looking determined. It was the lowest point of my life, and I think you need to understand that to appreciate what came after. The house was unbearable. Every room had her in it. Her reading glasses on the nightstand. a half-finished crossword puzzle on the coffee table, a pair of her running shoes by the back door that she'd left behind. I'd walk into the kitchen and see the mug she always used, the blue one with the chipped handle that she refused to throw away because I'd bought it for her at a farmer's market on our first trip together. I moved it to the back of the cabinet because I couldn't look at it without my chest caving in. I barely ate. I went to work because the alternative was sitting in that empty house losing my mind, but I was useless. My team could tell something was wrong, and Piper pulled me aside on Wednesday to tell me I could take a few days if I needed to. I told her I was fine, which was such an obvious lie that she just nodded and didn't press it. The hardest part wasn't the loneliness. It was the injustice. I kept replaying it in my head. My wife, the woman I'd shared 6 years of my life with, the woman I'd held when her grandmother died and cheered for at every race finish line and built a home with brick by boring brick, had taken my mother's word over everything we'd built together. She didn't ask me. She didn't confront me. She didn't even yell at me. She just left. Like I wasn't worth the conversation. That hurt more than the accusation itself. The accusation was absurd, and I knew the truth would come out eventually. But the fact that Josie heard a story from a woman she knew didn't like her and chose to believe it without giving me 30 seconds to respond, that cracked something inside me that I wasn't sure could be repaired. On the 6th day, I called my sister Sutton. We talked maybe 4 or 5 times a year, and it was always surface-level stuff. But I needed someone who understood our mother, and Sutton was the only other person on the planet who did. She picked up on the third ring. "This is new. You never call first." I told her everything. The whole story, start to finish. When I was done, there was a long pause, and then Sutton said something I'll never forget. I'm surprised it took her this long. She wasn't shocked, not even a little. She told me that our mother had tried something similar when Sutton was dating a woman named Reese back in college. Mom had called Reese's parents and told them Sutton was unstable and using their daughter. Reese's parents believed it, intervened, and the relationship ended. Sutton found out what happened months later, and that was the day she drew the line and moved across the country. "She can't stand not being the center of your world," Sutton said. And Josie replaced her. So Josie had to go. Hearing my sister lay it out like that, so clinical and clear, made me feel 2 things at once. Validated, because I wasn't crazy, and furious, because my mother had a pattern and I'd refused to see it. Sutton told me to stop trying to appeal to Josie's emotions and start presenting facts. "You can't argue someone out of a feeling," she said, "but you can show them receipts that make the feeling impossible to justify." That's what pushed me to build the folder. So there I was on Friday night, sitting at the dining room table surrounded by printed spreadsheets and credit card statements, organizing the most pathetic dossier of fidelity a man has ever assembled. Here's the thing about proving you didn't cheat. You're essentially proving a negative, which any philosophy student will tell you is a nightmare. But what I had going for me was that my mother's lie was specific. She said someone saw me at a hotel in Greensboro. She implied it had been going on for months. She said she had photos. The hotel claim was the easiest to demolish. I pulled my bank statements for the past 12 months. No hotel charges. Anywhere. Not in Greensboro, not in Charlotte, not in Timbuktu. I pulled my toll records from my Easy Pass account and mapped every single trip I'd taken. Not one of them went through Greensboro during the time frame she was referencing. I pulled my Google timeline data, which I'd forgotten I even had turned on, and it showed my location history in granular detail. Every night for the past 8 months, I was either at the office, at home, at the grocery store, or at Declan's place for our Thursday night poker game that we'd been running since before I even met Josie. Then I tackled the photos claim. I called my mother and left a voicemail, calm and measured. "Mom, you told Josie you had photos. I'd like to see them. Please send them to me." She never responded to that voicemail. Because there were no photos. Because nothing happened. Finally, I reached out to Piper and asked if she'd be willing to write a brief statement confirming the nature of our professional relationship. She didn't just agree, she went above and beyond. She had her husband, a guy named Grady who I'd met at multiple company events, write a statement too. Both of them confirmed that Piper and I had a strictly professional relationship, that they had been happily married for 19 years, and that the entire accusation was baseless. I put it all in a manila envelope. 36 pages of documents, statements, and timelines that collectively told the most boring story in the history of marriage. A guy who went to work, came home, and occasionally bought too much beef jerky at the gas station. Declan came through like the friend he is. He drove the envelope to Raleigh on Saturday morning and handed it to Glenn personally. I didn't go because I knew my presence would escalate things, and I needed the evidence to speak without the noise of an emotional confrontation. Declan told me later that Glenn took the envelope, looked him in the eye, and said, "I'll make sure she sees it." Then I waited. That Saturday and Sunday were a special kind of torture. The kind where you know the truth is out there, sitting in someone's hands, and all you can do is hope they're willing to look at it. I cleaned the house. I went for a run, even though I hate running. I reorganized the garage for no reason. I did anything I could to keep my hands busy and my brain from spiraling. On Sunday evening, my phone rang. It was Josie. I stared at her name on the screen for 3 full rings before I answered, and when I did, I didn't say hello. I just waited. Levi. Her voice was small, cracked, like she'd been crying recently, which she probably had. Yeah. I read everything. The statements. The bank records. All of it. Okay. Your mom lied. She lied about all of it. I closed my eyes and pressed the phone against my forehead for a second, and I felt something release in my chest that had been wound tight for 8 days. She finally knew. But here's the thing about relief. When it comes after betrayal, it doesn't come clean. It comes mixed with everything else. All the hurt and anger and disbelief. And you can't separate the good feeling from the bad ones. They just sit together in a pile, and you have to sort through them later. Yes, I said. She did. I'm so sorry. Levi, I'm so sorry. I should have talked to you. I should have asked you before I left. I just heard what she said and I panicked, and I couldn't breathe, and I thought if I looked at you I'd fall apart, so I just ran. I understood that. I did. Fear makes people do irrational things, and I knew Josie well enough to know that her deepest fear had always been being made a fool of. Her first boyfriend in college had cheated on her for over a year before she found out, and the humiliation of that experience had left a scar that never fully healed. My mother knew that story. She knew exactly where to aim. "Can I come home?" Josie asked. And that's the question, right? That's the moment the story could go one of 2 ways. The romantic version is that I said yes immediately, and we cried and held each other, and everything was fine. But this isn't a movie. This is my life. And the truth is, when she asked that question, I didn't feel relief anymore. I felt something closer to exhaustion. And underneath that exhaustion, a question I couldn't stop asking myself. Why didn't she ask me first? I didn't answer Josie's question right away. I sat with the phone pressed to my ear, and I let the silence stretch out longer than was comfortable, because I needed her to feel the weight of what had happened. Not to punish her, but because I wasn't going to pretend everything was fine when it wasn't. "Josie, I need some time," I finally said. "Time? Levi, I just want to come home. I know I messed up. I know I should have talked to you. But I want to fix this. And I want to fix it too. But you left me. You packed your bags and walked out of our house without saying a single word to me. You believed my mother, a woman you know has been trying to undermine you for years, over me. Over 6 years of marriage. Over everything I've ever shown you about who I am. I need you to understand that that did something to me that I can't just wave away because you're sorry." She was crying. I could hear it, and it broke my heart. But I kept going because this was the most important conversation of our marriage, and I couldn't afford to soften it. "I'm not saying no. I'm saying not yet. I need a few days to think, and I need you to respect that the same way you expected me to respect your space when you left." She said okay. It was barely a whisper, but she said it, and we hung up. I sat on the couch in the dark for a long time after that, and for the first time in over a week, I didn't feel panicked. I felt clear. The confusion was gone. The frantic energy was gone. What was left was a man who had been falsely accused, abandoned by his wife, and betrayed by his mother, and who now had to decide what his life was going to look like going forward. The first thing I did the next morning was call a therapist. I know. A lot of guys would rather chew glass than talk to a stranger about their feelings, and honestly, I would have been one of them 6 months earlier. But Declan had been seeing someone for years, a counselor named Dr. Ashby, and he'd told me more than once that it was the best decision he'd ever made. I called Dr. Ashby's office, explained the situation briefly, and got an appointment for Thursday. The second thing I did was call a lawyer. Not a divorce lawyer. Not yet, anyway. I called a family attorney named Greer Holloway who Declan's wife had used during a custody situation a few years back. I told her about my mother's fabricated accusations, about Josie leaving, and about the possibility that my mother's interference could escalate. Greer listened carefully and then asked me a question I hadn't considered. Has your mother done this before? Not just with your wife. With anyone. I told her about Sutton's experience with Reese. Greer nodded on the other end of the phone and said, if your mother continues to interfere in your marriage with fabricated claims, you may have grounds for a cease and desist, and depending on the damages, potentially a civil claim for tortious interference. I'd recommend documenting everything going forward. I was already ahead of her on the documentation. I had the folder. I had the voicemails my mother had left me. I had the text she'd sent me about people talking. And then Sutton came through with something I hadn't expected. She called me Tuesday night and said, I talked to Reese. She still had the emails Mom sent her parents back in college. She's willing to forward them to you. Those emails were a goldmine. Not because they were legally significant on their own, but because they showed a pattern. The language my mother used with Reese's parents was almost identical to what she'd told Josie. The same vague sources. The same crocodile tears about not wanting to cause pain. The same manufactured urgency designed to create maximum damage before anyone could verify the claims. My mother wasn't just a liar. She was a practiced one. I spent the next 3 days building a timeline. Every interaction, every text, every voicemail, every lie, documented and dated. Greer reviewed it and told me it was thorough. She drafted a cease and desist letter to my mother that laid out the pattern of behavior, the fabricated claims, and the consequences if she continued. I told Greer to hold it for now. I wanted to deliver it in person. Meanwhile, I went to my first session with Dr. Ashby. The man looked like someone's friendly uncle, with reading glasses perched on his nose and a coffee mug that said, I'm listening on it, which I appreciated for both the humor and the literal accuracy. He didn't try to fix anything in that first session. He just let me talk. And when I was done, he said something that rearranged my thinking. You're angry at your wife for not trusting you, and that's valid. But I want you to consider something. Your mother exploited a wound that existed before you. Josie's fear of being cheated on again isn't about you. It's about a trauma response that your mother weaponized. That doesn't excuse what Josie did, but it might change how you interpret it. That hit me right between the eyes. I had been so focused on the betrayal of trust that I hadn't fully considered the mechanics of how my mother had pulled it off. She didn't just lie. She targeted Josie's most vulnerable spot with surgical precision. She knew about the college boyfriend. She knew about Josie's fear, and she used it like a crowbar. On Wednesday, Josie texted me. Not begging, not pressuring, just a simple message. I started seeing a therapist today. I want you to know I'm doing the work. That mattered to me more than any apology she'd given so far. Apologies are words. Therapy is action. It told me she understood that what happened wasn't just about my mother's lie. It was about why she'd been so willing to believe it without question, and she was trying to understand that about herself. Thursday evening, after my second session with Dr. Ashby, I called Josie and told her I wanted to meet. Not at the house, somewhere neutral. She suggested a park near her parents' place, a spot we'd actually gone to on one of our early dates, which was either a coincidence or a very deliberate emotional play. Either way, I agreed. We met on Friday afternoon. She looked thinner, tired. Her eyes were puffy in a way that told me the crying hadn't stopped just because the truth was out. She was sitting on a bench near the pond, and when she saw me walking toward her, she stood up and her hands were shaking. Thank you for coming, she said. Of course I came. We sat down and we talked for almost 3 hours. Real talk. Not the surface-level reassurance loop we'd been stuck in over text. She told me about the moment my mother called her, how she'd been cooking dinner when the phone rang, and how Colleen had started the conversation with, I've been going back and forth about whether to tell you this, and I've decided you deserve to know. She told me how the details my mother provided were specific enough to feel credible, the hotel in Greensboro, the late nights, the way I'd been distant lately. She told me how she'd sat on the kitchen floor after the call and felt like the walls were closing in, and how every fear she'd carried since college came roaring back like it had never left. I know I should have asked you, she said. I know that's what a rational person would do, but I wasn't rational. I was 21 again, finding out that someone I loved had been lying to my face, and the only thing I could think was that I had to get out before it got worse. I didn't forgive her in that moment. Forgiveness isn't a switch you flip, but I understood her, and understanding is the foundation that forgiveness gets built on. Then I told her my plan. I told her about Greer, about the cease and desist. About the emails from Reese. About the pattern. And I told her that before she could come home, one thing needed to happen first. We need to confront my mother. Together. And she needs to hear, from both of us, that this is over. Not the marriage. Her access to it. Josie looked at me with something I hadn't seen in her eyes in a long time. It wasn't relief or gratitude. It was respect. When? She asked. Sunday, I said. I already told her we're coming for dinner. My mother was thrilled when I called to say we were coming for Sunday dinner. Thrilled. She probably thought her plan had worked, that Josie was gone for good, and now her baby boy was coming home to eat pot roast and pretend everything was normal. She even asked if I wanted her to make her famous peach cobbler, which, for the record, is neither famous nor particularly good, but I said sure because I needed her relaxed and unsuspecting. Josie picked me up Saturday evening, and we drove to a hotel near my mom's house so we could go over everything one more time. We sat on the bed with papers spread across the comforter like we were planning a heist, which in a way, I guess we were. A heist of the truth. We went through the timeline, the evidence, the emails from Reese, the cease and desist letter, and the boundaries we were going to set. We rehearsed what we'd say, not word for word, but the main points. We agreed on what was non-negotiable. And then Josie said something that nearly took me out. I need you to know that even if your mother hadn't lied, even if this was just about you working late and me being insecure, I should have talked to you. I failed us. And I'm going to spend however long it takes earning back the trust one broke. I looked at her for a long time. Then I reached over and took her hand, and it was the first time we'd touched in over 2 weeks. It felt like coming up for air after being underwater so long you'd forgotten what breathing was. Sunday came, and we pulled into my mom's driveway at 4 o'clock. Her house is a modest 3-bedroom in a neighborhood that peaked in 1997, with a front yard she maintains with an almost religious devotion because the neighbors' opinions are her primary source of sustenance. She opened the door with a big smile, saw Josie standing next to me, and the smile flickered. Just for a second. Just enough for me to see the recalculation happening behind her eyes. Well, she said, recovering quickly. This is a surprise. Come in, both of you. We sat in the living room. She offered drinks. We declined. She started chattering about the weather and some drama at her book club and how the new pastor at church was a little too progressive for her taste. And I let her talk because I wanted her comfortable. I wanted her guard down. When the small talk ran out, I leaned forward and put the manila envelope on the coffee table between us. Mom, we need to talk about what you told Josie. The shift in her posture was immediate. She straightened up, crossed her arms, and her face went from pleasant to defensive in about half a second. I already told you. I was just passing along what I'd heard. From who? I asked. Who told you I was at a hotel in Greensboro? A friend. Which friend? I don't think that's relevant. It's entirely relevant because the friend doesn't exist. Nobody told you anything because nothing happened. I have 12 months of bank statements, toll records, GPS data, and building access logs that prove I was never in Greensboro during any of the nights you're talking about. I have a written statement from Piper and her husband confirming that our relationship is strictly professional. And I have emails you sent to Reese's parents 15 years ago using the exact same playbook you used on my wife. That last one landed. I watched her face change, saw the color drain out of it, saw her mouth open slightly, and then close again. She hadn't known I'd talked to Sutton. She definitely hadn't known about the emails. Sutton had no right to share those, she said. And the fact that her first response was about the emails and not about denying the lie told me everything. You're not going to address what you did, Josie said, and her voice was steady in a way that made me incredibly proud. You called me and told me my husband was cheating on me. You said you had photos. You said someone saw them at a hotel. None of that was true. You made it all up. I was trying to protect you. Protect me from what? From a faithful husband who comes home every night? From a man who has never given me a single reason to doubt him? You weren't protecting me, Colleen. You were trying to destroy my marriage because you can't stand that your son chose someone other than you. The room went very quiet. My mother looked at me, and for the first time in my life, I didn't see the mask. I saw the real her, small and cornered and furious that she'd been caught. Levi, you can't seriously be taking her side over your own mother. There are no sides, Mom. There's the truth, and there's what you made up. I'm not choosing Josie over you. I'm choosing reality. She started crying. Right on schedule. The tears came, and her lip trembled, and she reached for the tissue box on the end table like she'd rehearsed this 1,000 times, which she probably had. But for the first time, the tears didn't work on me. They bounced right off. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, and I slid the cease and desist letter out of the envelope and placed it in front of her. "This is a legal document from my attorney. It outlines the pattern of behavior you've engaged in, starting with what you did to Sutton and Reese, and ending with what you did to Josie and me. If you contact Josie again, if you spread lies about me or my marriage to anyone, if you attempt to interfere in our lives in any way, we will pursue legal action." That's not a threat. That's a promise. She picked up the letter and read it. I watched her eyes move across the page, and I could see the moment it hit her that this wasn't a bluff. Her hands were shaking when she put it down. "You'd really do this to your own mother? You did this to yourself. You lied. You manipulated. You tried to destroy something I built because you couldn't control it. That's not how this works anymore." She looked at Josie. "I hope you're happy. You've turned my son against me." Josie didn't flinch. "Nobody turned him against you, Colleen. You pushed him away all by yourself. We left. We didn't stay for dinner. We didn't stay for cobbler. We walked out of that house and got in the car, and I sat in the driver's seat for a minute before starting the engine because I needed to breathe." Josie moved back home the following week. We didn't just fall back into routine. We started couples therapy with a woman named Dr. Tatum who specialized in trust repair. The sessions were hard. Josie had to sit with the fact that she'd left without asking. I had to sit with the fact that I'd let my mother's behavior go unchecked for years, creating the conditions that made the lie possible. We both had work to do, and we did it. My mother tried reaching out twice in the first month. Once through a cousin named Bev who called to tell me I was being too harsh, and once through a handwritten letter that was 6 pages of self-pity and 0 pages of accountability. Greer sent a follow-up letter after the Bev incident, and after that, the contact stopped. Sutton and I talk more now. Not every day, but regularly. She told me she's proud of me, which is not something I'd ever heard from anyone in my family, and it meant more than she probably knows. She and Reese actually reconnected a few years ago, and they're together now, living in Portland with a dog named Buckley who apparently has strong opinions about which couch cushion belongs to him. Josie and I are solid. Not perfect, not like nothing happened, but solid in a way that feels more honest than what we had before. The cracks are visible, but they're filled in with something stronger than what was there originally. She trusts me. I trust her. And we both know now that trust isn't a feeling. It's a practice. It's a choice you make every single day to believe in the person next to you, even when fear is screaming in your ear to run. A couple months after the confrontation, Josie and I were sitting on the back deck watching the sun go down, and she turned to me and said, "I'm sorry I didn't ask." I looked at her and said, "I know, and I'm sorry I didn't see what my mother was building until it was almost too late." She leaned her head on my shoulder, and we sat there for a while, not talking, just existing in the same space. And for the first time in a long time, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt like home. As for my mother, last I heard from Bev, she's telling anyone who'll listen that I abandoned her and that Josie brainwashed me. Some people believe her. Most don't, especially after Sutton posted a very measured, very factual account of her own experience on the family group chat, which apparently caused the kind of chaos that makes Thanksgiving dinners interesting for decades. I don't hate my mother. I just don't have room for her anymore. My life is full of people who love me honestly, who show up without agendas, and who would never dream of tearing down something beautiful just because they weren't the center of it. And the peach cobbler? I make my own now. Josie says it's better than Colleen's. Between you and me, the bar was never that high, but I'll take the compliment.